Perfect. You mentioned that the area was affected by grazing and also by deforestation. What do you see are the current problems in New Zealand with agriculture and the treatment of nature?
Big problems. I'm fairly preoccupied with them at this scale, actually, as a climate activist. Half of New Zealand's carbon emissions come from agriculture, particularly methane, but also carbon dioxide and nitrous oxide. New Zealand has tried to ignore the contribution of agriculture because the country is so dependent on agricultural exports, particularly dairy. However, there are solutions to this problem. We have a new government which will take quite a different approach to dealing with the problems of agriculture. I should say that while I'm a little bit fixed on the issue of climate change, which appears to me so very urgent, it's not the only ecological problem incurred in agriculture in New Zealand. Soil is also a huge issue, what intensive dairying does to soil. Waterways are prominent. People are starting to really care about the pollution, the agricultural pollution of New Zealand rivers. So mainly by nitrate leaching. So these are biodiversity is another issue with declines in biodiversity, while far too much habitat of native creatures is lost to agricultural conversion. So that's a listing of some of the problems, and I suppose on the cheerful side, there's the beginnings of realization in New Zealand that these problems have to be tackled. Naturally, a lot of resistance, but there is movement on a number of fronts towards approaching the solutions to these problems. Permaculture, of course, the principles of permaculture are a big part of the solution. There are organic dairy farms that dispense with some of the things that particularly pollute the waterways. There is the beginning of realization that silviculture, mixing the culture of trees alongside pastoral grazing, is part of the solution. Anyway, I'll get too carried away with that one too. I think it's a big problem. There are solutions. There are the beginnings of movement towards the solutions. There has to be a lot more.
Going to a different area of permaculture, the Galtung Institute, we are also wanting to start permaculture, and in specific in Ghana, in West Africa. Do you have any recommendations for starting such a project? For example, also connected to fundraising, because as you already mentioned, the funding is very important to move the project forward.
Yeah, I would need to know what is the kind of community that wants to start the project, or what kind of land and what sort of things grow there, what are the ecological problems, which is probably not the sort of response that is useful here. I would encourage those involved in the project to take the principles of permaculture quite seriously. I'm thinking of broad principles like make sure that from the beginning you try to obtain a yield, and start small and move slowly, observing all the way. Principles like these in permaculture, they were laid down very wisely, I think, and worth taking them quite seriously. But I have to say, Sebastian, I regard myself as a sort of early grade learner in permaculture, rather than a useful advisor in permaculture. But I'm impressed by the principles of permaculture. I think they're very wise.
So you would say that it's not a short-term approach or short-term solution, but really for the long term, and that you take time and also have patience by not rushing into creating something out of nothing in a few months.
Yes, I would think that's important, and that might make it difficult to work in with funding cycles, which tend to want to see lots of big results quite quickly. So yeah, it's that seems to me an important principle, which I think we probably didn't observe well enough ourselves.
Going to the threats for the project, do you see any threats like that can endanger the continuation of Atamai village? Maybe connected to population growth or the land price value or urbanization, for example?
Land prices have been a major problem for us because the land is steep, as I've described it. Developing sites for houses is quite expensive, and so the land prices have been quite high, and lots of people who were interested in joining the village couldn't afford the land. And that was a serious problem. It's a difficult problem to find answers to. I think co-housing, where multiple families can share a dwelling, is part of the solution to that problem. Population growth has not been part of our problem at all, and pardon me, neither has urbanization. New Zealand is relatively low population and relatively little urbanized, which makes it attractive for a project like this.
In an interview that I read online, you said that it needed a specific place with some criteria so that the development can work out. Do you see that that's needed in every permaculture project, or can permaculture work at any place?
Yeah, not at all. That was very specific application in our own case, where we thought we needed to give ourselves the best chance of having the whole thing work, and being relatively advanced in years, that it wouldn't be too much of an enormous struggle, requiring a lot of physical labor to have it work. So that was very specific and fairly personal. I think permaculture principles apply in every case. I mean, they're hugely adaptive principles. In fact, adaptation to the situation is part of permaculture. And I can't think of any situation in which humans are attempting to live on a part of the earth and create a living for themselves. I can't think of any situation in which it wouldn't apply.
the last topic I want to mention is specific to Atamai village. There's self-governance happening, and also the self-reliant aspect and crew processes that are happening because you have 8 families. How are these crew processes and the mingling and the interaction, how are they practiced in your village?
Right. Well, I'll describe both more formal and informal processes, starting with the formal ones. Because we share land in the village and share labour on that land, there are decisions to be made about that land. And because we work together and at intervals eat together and so on, there are decisions to be made about how our community works. So we have evolved a method of consensus decision making, which in my opinion works extremely well. It's a modified consensus decision making, so that if there is persistent, we have methods to deal with blocking, the idea of blocking decisions in consensus decision making, and I won't go into details, but we have ways of dealing with persistent or vexatious blocking, which can be very disturbing for communities. We feel we can cope. Our method copes with that. But there's a certain formality to our meetings for decision making. For example, at the beginning of the meetings, we're all issued with a set of cards, and if we want to ask a question, we hold up a certain card that indicates we want to ask. If we want to make a comment, it's a different card. We want to make a process suggestion. We want to say, "Oh, I think it's time we close this discussion. We spent enough time on it." Different card. So there's a certain formality to it, but we find that it works very well for us. And now we've used it for many years, and I think we're quite pleased with it, actually. So that's the formal part of decision making in our group. We also have tried to adhere to principles of conflict resolution. The idea that when there are conflicts, you take it to the person with whom you have the conflict, and you don't gossip to everyone else in the village about it. And if that doesn't work sufficiently well, then you ask for assistance and mediation in the conflict. And with exceptions, that's worked well. Now, informal, we have fun together. We span a very wide age range. Jack and I are the oldest, in our mid-70s, and the youngest are, I don't know, 4, 5, 6-year-olds. And it's lovely. I have children in my life, enjoying playing and doing things with them. When we have working bees in the orchard, some of the children join in, and I can think of just recently I worked in a little team with a 6-year-old. We were thinning apples on apple trees. You have to pluck off some of them to make the rest grow big, and he and I worked together as a team, chatting all the way in the sunshine on the beautiful hillside. It's very pleasant. We eat together, not super frequently, but at regular intervals. We have shared meals together, which are always really nice. We have some celebrations together. For example, for Christmas, we're planning a beach picnic to which we can either kayak or walk for 45 minutes. So yeah, that I must say that part brings me a good deal of joy. and I think brings most people a fair bit of pleasure. There are lots of ways that we share resources: food, drink, skills, time, a shoulder to cry on, babysitting, tools, and in particularly relevant to cutting down carbon emissions, we share transport. One often finds on one's email in the morning, anyone going to town today, I'd like a lift. So ride sharing is very much part of village practice.
That sounds like a community that is really working together, and the sharing aspect is very, or seems very attractive to me.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Joanna, for giving us all these beautiful answers. I have one more thing left. You are also a retired child psychologist, and you wrote a book with Johann Galtung and Diane Permel called Reconciliation. Is there an intersection between this work on reconciliation and the work you're doing now in the Atamai village?
Yes, of course, Sebastian. There is, because you have people coming together from various roots in their lives, with various experiences, various expectations. You definitely, under these circumstances, are going to experience conflict. It's just part of the deal. And occasionally the conflict will result in people being hurt. And when people are hurt, that requires reconciliation. And so, first of all, the knowledge and skills of conflict resolution are highly relevant. And secondly, and less often, the knowledge and skills in reconciliation are relevant. I mean, sometimes it needs a lot of time to work out, but the knowledge and skills, I think, are very relevant.